want to start just by introducing our panelists. Bob Fingerman is the author, most recently, of Maximum Minimum Wage, which is a collection of his comic book series, Minimum Wage, reconfigured with all sorts of extras, highly recommended. He's also the author of From the Ashes and a couple of novels, Pariah and Bottom Feeder, among many other books and illustrations. Miriam Katin is with us. She's the author of her new book, Letting It Go, which is a memoir. Her last book was We Are On Our Own. And she's also done a handful of children's books and has worked as an animation backgrounder and designer. And over here is Stan Mack. His most recent book is here, Taxes, the Tea Party, and Those Revolting Rebels, A History in Comics of the American Revolution. It's a mouthful. It's a great history in comics form. He's also done wonderful comic strips, including Stan Mack's Real Life Funnies, which ran for many, many years in the Village Voice, and a strip that's near and dear to my heart, Mule's Diner, which was in National Lampoon. He also had a strip called Stan Mack's Outtakes. So welcome. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Wanted to start out because we were just chit-chatting a little bit about where we all lived. And all of you have made work very much about New York. Your new book has New York very much as a character. Miriam and Bob, of course, Minimum Wage is quintessential New York. And Stan, despite this new book, which is not New York, for years chronicled the lives and the lives in and the life of the city. So,
but inspired by New York, specifically.
This is?
Yes.
Oh, why don't you go right ahead?
Well, for some of you may remember the Tompkins Park riots, and I was covering them from the street level, hanging out with squatters and homeless and other village activists fighting against the mayor and the real estate interests which worked behind him. And out of that came a conversation with an editor who happened to live on St. Mark's, very close to the park, and who said, have you ever thought about doing anything about these strips you've been working on, which were very immediate, always? And I said, well, what fascinates me is people going into the street and protesting, and where do our rights and responsibilities begin and end? Because I was watching that happen over there. And out of that came, well, let's go back to the beginning and see what sparked the revolution in the first place.
And then how did the book evolve from there? You just started researching and...
Well, everything I did was reporting up until that point.
Right.
But to go back, I have an attitude problem. So looking at George Washington and John and Sam Adams and Jefferson and so on, I tried to do it from the same street level, in a way, that I did with by hanging out at the park with guys who were sleeping in refrigerator boxes often. But to tell honest history as well, so that kind of came that way.
Gotcha. Miriam, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about New York and sort of how it's very much a part of the new book, as your sort of home base, and drawings of New York are particularly beautiful. So if you could talk a bit about that.
Thank you for the question. I tried other cities too, nilly-willy, and after quite a few cities, I decided that New York was the best ever. I never want to live anywhere else.
When did you arrive?
I arrived first time in 1963, and we were here 18 years. I married an American, and 18 years, and then we went again to Israel for a year, and we stayed 9 years. And toward the end of those 9 years, we went to any silly movie that had New York in it. And that will show you that we just wanted to get back here. I love the city. And this last book is partially where I live. It's a character, I guess.
And did you spend a lot of time just going out and sketching, or did you have to work up studies, or did it come pretty naturally?
Well, I live it. Of course, things like the subway, I want to be exact in things like that, or going to the Museum of Natural History. I took pictures, or now it's so nice, I go online. And I needed the Hungarian consulate. Now, I'm not going to take pictures across the consulate, yes? So, you just Google it, and up and down, over, under, it's available.
Google,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Google Earth,
Earth, yes. And that was safe.
Right.
And of course, where I live in Washington Heights, we live like the building is built on a highest spot in the city, and we live the river, we live the sunrise, the sunset, the bridge, the Jersey Shore, the birds flying around. So I really wanted to do something with that magic that we live with, and but I'm not a painter. I can't do this easel thing or whatever. But I wanted to use it so badly, and when this book came around, I used it. I was so happy to be able to use where I live. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Bob, I mean, you captured New York at a very particular time in the 90s.
Yeah. And I don't have a beautiful view to inspire me.
No, not at all.
So I just automatically kind of gravitate towards the gutter. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but, I mean, minimum wage is set in part in Bay Ridge.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of it in Manhattan. You're going to offices. I just wondered sort of what were you at? Were you just trying to get at what your experience of the city was, or were you interested in investigating it as well? I mean, you mentioned that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think
Times
there's
Square story.
Yeah, I don't think there was any investigating. I don't know. I think especially between these two people, there's a shocking lack of wanting to do homework in my work. So it's just kind of like the immediacy of what I'm experiencing, and then putting it, I'll painstakingly portray it, but I don't really want to have to research it all that much. So I guess it was just to kind of write what you know.
Yeah.
But so if I was, I'm flattered when people say, Mike Mignola said that my New York was so real you could smell it. That was
Right.
He particularly was referring to 14th Street, because at that point it definitely had its own aroma.
Right.
So I don't know. It was just kind of getting it on paper the way. I think if I thought about it too much, it probably wouldn't have come out as well. It was just like I was just drawing what I thought of when I thought of those places, right. And then I guess it came across authentically. Yeah. So. And now Google Maps exists, so right. I don't even have to leave my home. What's it look like on 14th Street 2 months ago? Okay, I'll see some arrows and distorted photos and say, fine, I don't have to leave my house.
Precisely.
And now that there's a new edition of minimum wage out, so what is it, 15 years after you drew it?
Yeah.
Has the city, obviously the city has changed.
The city has changed.
Ton. But did that make...
Far fewer White Castles at this point.
Right,
which is maybe a good
That's
thing.
An antiquated reference now.
Exactly. White Castles were small steamed hamburgers that gave you diarrhea. That's...
Right.
And they cost 15 cents a piece.
That's why.
15 cents, were they?
I don't know. They were cheap.
There's
a reason why starving cartoonists would go, buy a sack full of poison.
Yeah.
Cheap.
15 cents diarrhea is very cheap, because my diarrhea cost us an airline ticket back and forth Berlin. So,
As I say, I'm
you
a
got a
slave of
bargain there.
convenience.
You got a bargain, right? Yeah.
And speaking of sort of observation, I wonder just if you guys could talk about sort of how you came to make, Bob, yours is sort of cloaked nonfiction.
Right.
Stan, yours is nonfiction, and so, as is Miriam. So how did that come about for you guys, working nonfiction, as opposed to doing, fiction?
Well, for me, there was no choice. I didn't come from the comics world, despite Mule's Diner.
Right. What world did you?
Well, I worked in newspapers. I was an art director first, for those of you who go back far enough, to the New York Herald Tribune, which was really the birthplace of what they called the new journalism, the journalism of... Jimmy Breslin and Gloria Steinem and Pete Hamill and Dick Schaap.
When were you at the Herald?
In the 60s, just before it closed down. But I was in the middle of a world I knew nothing about up until that moment. I went to art school in Providence and got swept up in the romance of it. So and then moved over to the New York Times again as an art director. By that time, I loved the idea of sending illustrators out to cover events instead of photographers. Fell in love with that idea and then went from there to The Voice, where I only knew how to cover things. I didn't ever think of myself until recent years as a fiction writer at all. So in fact, because it was pure reporting, but the editors had never seen anything like this before, really. I mean, this world that we're in here today didn't exist. They put an underline under the title called "All Dialogue Guaranteed Verbatim," meaning that I went out there and did it. I didn't rewrite. I edited to get it into the space, but it was as pure. It was like loading up a truck full of comments and dumping them onto this page once a week without doing what writers do, I always thought, which is to shape it and change it and make it into something. This was pretty pure.
And who were your peers at the time? Who else was doing that kind of work? Anybody? I mean, Pfeiffer to a degree.
Yeah, there was nobody who, I don't think, really that I was aware of. Certainly there was Mouse, a little bit later.
Later, much later.
But I don't know that and there may have been people way back who did cartoons, and the old New York News probably had somebody in the 30s and stuff, but nobody was doing that literal comic strip format and saying this is the real thing.
I think the only thing I can think of maybe would be when like Harvey Kurtzman would send young Crumb off to cover Harlem or this or that.
Or
that's the only other thing I can
Harlem
think of.
And
that makes sense.
Bulgaria?
Reportage.
Where did they send?
Yeah, he sent, I think, to Prague maybe.
Yeah, someplace.
But he sent him a couple of places and said just draw like
Draw
a comic journal of what you saw. That's the only other thing I can think of besides your work.
I wished, I didn't know enough, but I wished I could have gone overseas. I've done a lot of traveling since, but it was too raw and new, so I covered the world I was fascinated by and was right outside the door.
You didn't have a lavish budget like Health Magazine. So.
Right.
The Village Voice budget, did you say?
Yes, the budget. Okay. Well, we can continue that. And Bob?
Well, I can't claim to do the whole. I do fiction.
Yeah.
Everything I do, I think, it's very personal. I mean, even the genre stuff I've done, zombies and vampires, is in a weird way curiously autobiographical. But I mean, I've never committed to just saying I want to do nonfiction.
Although Minimum Wage felt very much like
it is, but even there, it's carefully mentally edited, and it's fiction. I mean, it's got enough of my reality in it to give it that feel of straight saying how it was, but it's all judiciously shaped or not so judiciously shaped.
And how did you find your way into comics? I've never really. I mean, you were doing a lot of illustration.
Yeah, I mean.
But you were doing comics at a very young age, right? In your early 20s, you started. Or?
Yeah. I mean, actually, I guess the first. I had a book contract when I was 19. It never actually materialized.
What for?
But it made me very cocky. It made me cocky enough to drop out of SVA, which was a good choice. No offense to. Oops, this is being sponsored. Yeah. SVA is great. It's much better now than it was 20-something years ago.
What was the book contract?
It was with a French publisher, with Albin Michel. Huh. It was going to be a book of parody strips of an already running Italian strip. I know.
It's random.
It is random.
Wow. And go ahead.
But I mean, comic books never held that much fascination for me, but I always liked the form of comics. So I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to draw pictures. Just seemed the natural thing to do both at the same time.
Yeah.
What's happening?
I don't know what's happening back there.
As long as a garrote doesn't come out.
Yeah,
This looks like a perfectly good execution stage.
And Miriam You came to comics.
Oh yes, came to comics.
I mean, and you came out with an entire book first, which is very unusual.
Well, I was working in first back in Israel. I was working in animated pictures, and after we did a commercial for television for saving energy, they turned to me. That was 1987 and something. They turned to me if I could possibly do comic strips connected to saving energy for a youth magazine. I said, oh, sure, anything. If I don't have to diaper and cook and in a kibbutz. We lived in a kibbutz, okay? So if you didn't have animation work, you had to go diaper and do it, cook and whatever.
So it was
anything,
animation or housework.
So
It's an unusual dichotomy.
My children brought me up on Tintin because in Israel it was already popular from Europe.
Yeah.
And so I ran out, bought some comic books, and I did it, and I was hooked. I loved it. But it wasn't another 10, 12 years before I was working on background design, and young people around me who did comics decided, well, nobody will publish them, so they self-published a wonderful series, anthologies called Monkey Suit. And they asked me if I had something, and I had something, and that was my first work, and I got a very great encouragement, and then I went to Drawn and Quarterly with them.
And how did you find, or how did Drawn and Quarterly find you? Or?
No, I didn't. I was working in MTV, and this Greg McElhatton, he's a reviewer, and he reviewed Monkey Suit, and he said my work could stand up in Drawn and Quarterly. So I said to my colleagues at MTV, what's Drawn and Quarterly? I had no idea what any of that. Nobody. I'm so green. She said, Miriam, you don't know. So I ran out to the bookstore nearby. I got volume 3. Well, you know, the volumes.
Oh, sure.
And I looked at it, and, such chutzpah. I didn't know you're not supposed to do that. I took the book, I took the copy of the review, and a letter to Chris Oliveros, I didn't know. And the next thing I knew, I got a phone call from him. He says, oh, do you have anything hanging around the place? Like, you probably have a lot of things around. I said, oh, sure, I didn't have anything, not a thing. But I ran home, and I got done under the 12-page story. And that was in volume 4.
Okay.
And the next was the book.
And the next was the book. Wow.
Yeah. Plunged right in.
And Bob, I was curious about your publishing history a bit, because Image is publishing Maximum Minimum Wage.
Yeah.
And before that, it was Fantagraphics for a long time. I just wondered about sort of publishing decisions, and then you published with Tor, your novels, and IDW.
Yeah,
been all over the place.
Yeah,
so I just wondered what.
I mean, some of it's a little bit of it's any port in the storm.
Sure.
Who will have me?
Yeah.
Who will pay me? When that's not an option, which is often the case, then it's who will kind of do, or at least who do I think will do the best by me.
Right.
And also, out of the kind of work that I do, it only appeals to. It's a little niche, or niche, however you want to say it. But I don't know. In terms of. I also never wanted to just lock myself down to one publisher. Mm-hmm. I always thought it would be kind of. I just think it's. Maybe this is my own neurosis or whatever. I always think if I stuck with one publisher, it would seem like no one else would have me. So it's kind of good to spread it out a little bit. But.
And what was the process of making the new minimum wage book? I mean, it seems like it must have been a sort of a mammoth undertaking.
Well, the only mammoth part is, I mean, in the intro I wrote to it, I joke in large air quotes that I was going to call it the OCD edition.
Right.
And that's because for whatever reason, that is the one book of mine that I keep going back to. And every time there's an opportunity to do a new edition, I rejigger it. My wife actually said to me, she fairly adamantly said, "I forbid you from redrawing anything." And I said, "I'll keep it to 10 panels." And I think I probably redrew and reworked about 50 pages, again, because I just can't help myself.
What's an OCD?
Obsessive compulsive disorder.
Oh.
So I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I mean, that book, every iteration of it has been different than the past. I think I'm quoting myself, which seems like a real jackass thing to do. But I said they're like mass-produced snowflakes. You know, no two are alike. So,
right. Is it enjoyable to rework it?
It is, I mean, but at this point,
do you keep learning?
I'm very seriously thinking of starting the series up again. Partly because I want to continue the story, and also to keep me from just keep reworking this. I say this is the definitive edition for now, but who knows? 5 years from now, there'll be a new one where I'll go back in.
And would you do the new series as pamphlets, or as?
That remains to be seen.
Yeah. So,
yeah, I think it's time to come back to it. For years, I was trying to figure out how I could come back to it in a way that wouldn't make me miserable. Because I enjoyed doing that part, but without spoilers, the story was going to get a bit darker.
Right.
So I had to figure out how I could do it without, dreading facing the board every day. And finally, as I was working on that, the solution came to me. So now I'm kind of excited about revisiting these characters.
That's cool. And Stan, this volume is also sort of an expanded version of a previous...
edited, added to, right. It started during that time of the Tompkins Park activities and has recently been redone with a new title and updated. Speaking of going back and changing things, I like that idea. Just because it's a book doesn't mean it's finished.
Right.
I've made a couple of revisions actually since...
You.
Well, my drawing looks like it also. Since it came out, I've made a revision, and that's happened with a couple other of the books also. I've read great painters often will sit in front of or keep a painting in their studio for years sometimes, and then go back and play. So, well, I don't compare myself to them. At least it is, and it's nonfiction, so that in a way that's a different kind of problem.
Well, I think also there's this thing about considering a book like that's definitive, but if there's going to be another printing of it, why? Like my second novel, Pariah, the last couple of pages are different in the mass market paperback than they are in the first edition. It's not, I didn't make anything of it, but I thought that final couple of paragraphs could use a little tweak.
Yes, I mean, that's very unusual.
Back in there, rewrite it just slightly.
Huh.
Why not?
Why not?
And it keeps, if there are one or two collector nuts out there who need every edition, at least it gives them a little teeny justification.
Right. And Stan, how deep was the research on this? I mean, did you have to go back for the new edition?
I'm an amateur historian at best.
Yeah.
So I did some major reading in the first place, and since as well. I've since done a graphic novel with my wife and partner, Susan Champlin, on a fictional version of that takes place during the American Revolution. So I've been going back and visiting this material for a long time, but I felt enormous pressure, worrying that historians were going to look at this thing and go, well, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. The cartoons may be funny, but is that enough? So I did a lot. I've got boxes full of readings that I go back and look at now and can't believe the amount of work that went into it in the first place. I've done that with other books as well.
Yeah.
The story, the history of the Jewish people is another one.
Right. That's
only 4,000 years.
Yeah, that's a lot of history, from what I understand. Yeah.
And people will disagree on what it's all about.
Yes, there's a lot of arguing in
but there's a lot
history.
of jokes in Jewish history.
That too. It's good. Keep
we
it
go
light.
easy on the people who write histories about us.
Yeah. And your research is essentially your own history.
Yeah, it's but not that easy because when I do my work, I also feel what makes it real is how good it is, well researched it is, and I also love researching through, and it's very important, especially with fairly realistic work like mine. For example, I have a tremendous, alarming library of World War II battles and all that, and weapons, and you also go online, of course. But everything has to be exact because the people who care about that stuff. They care so much
Right.
that you got bloggers who say, "Oh, that little symbol in Hungary did not exist." I mean, I swear, that year was not there anymore, and you really have to be very serious about it. And we are, we are obsessing over everything.
Yeah, the internet has given pedants a voice that they never had
Totally.
before.
That's true.
A friend of mine who's a very good writer, he has learned the hard way that
Me
if
too.
you write anything wrong about a gun,
Oh,
gun nuts will come at you from every direction saying, that's the
absolutely.
wrong this or that or whatever. And he would do his research. He would talk to military police or this or that. He would still get 100 emails. That entire book was garbage because this one gun description was inaccurate.
Can't be trusted.
Very careful.
That's why I
about
make
it.
shit up.
It's wise. Yeah.
Well, I claim that the words are true, but I think it says in the foreword, don't anybody ever try to shoot one of the guns in my drawing.
That's good. That's funny.
There were no electric flintlocks.
I'm not going to do that kind of research.
Well, with that, I wanted to open it up to questions. Any questions in the audience?
No question.
Complaints?
Sound of crickets?
Yes. I guess is there a mic coming around?
I can shout too. Can you
That-
hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This is a question for Stan. I was wondering, earlier in your career you did real life funnies, and I was just wondering about when you turned to reportage about events more than overt conversations, if it hindered you at first creatively, or if it opens you up for is it more challenging to do things where you have to do a lot of background research or so on?
When I started Real Life Funnies, I was a total amateur. I was an art director. I knew nothing about reporting. I went out and I collected stuff however I could. I hung out at singles bars and I went to protest groups and all kinds of stuff like that, and would come home and dump it on the page. But gradually I became perhaps overly sophisticated. You can't help yourself. Eventually I had a press pass from The Voice. Originally I didn't. And so with that happening, it seemed to me more important to dig deeper than just that superficial event that you capture with one run-through of an event that was over a few hours later. So little by little, I moved into a deeper approach to what was going on, for better or worse, including sometimes, in effect, isolating somebody who was at that singles bar, taking them out for a cup of coffee, and digging into their life, because I want to know what happened beyond that. And the same sort of thing happened with fiction. You just want to go deeper and take on have a bigger canvas, I guess.
You wouldn't want to be superficial at a singles bar?
That's what made the strips work.
I saw another question out there. Yeah.
Hi, this is also a question for Stan Mack. If I recall correctly, you used to do a weekly strip for Adweek.
Yes.
I used to think, I loved that. I thought it had a fabulous eye for the ironic. How much of that was based on direct observation, and how much was it perhaps fictionalized?
All of it was direct. And that was the problem. Adweek, unlike going to a bar or Plato's Retreat or something like that, you had to be invited in by a creative director or an account executive, somebody, or a director, or go to a casting session, and they had to trust that I wasn't going to give away. I mean, this is secret stuff. It's like this place. You have meetings in an advertising agency, nothing's supposed to get out. So that required that I swore, for one thing, that I would call them and tell them after I knew what the story was going to be, what it was, and let them decide if they wanted to fictionalize the agency, their own name, the product name, because it wasn't a celebrity-driven storyline. It was meant to capture a moment. And that was part of how I got away with it.
Yes?
I'll speak loud. This is for Miriam.
Yes.
I just picked up your new one yesterday, and I didn't have time to get into it, but I really
I really love the colors, and some of the writing is so funny, especially that bit about martinis. But do you use colored pencil?
I use colored pencil. Yes.
Because I don't see too much of that in the field, but it seems like it's a very beautiful medium to use the way you do it.
Thank you. It's also kind of forgiving, you know. You can erase very well and all that. And I try to do other things. Sometimes I use ink in other works, but I love the richness that, you know, and the ease, actually, also, you know. I try to do something else with this, and also I didn't think of not using panel, you know, frames, but what happened when I started to do this particular book, it was very much on real time, as it was happening with me, that I did the story, and the emotions just took over, and I totally lost patience with frames and structure, and I just decided I just ran off wilding with my pencil, and, you know, not being able to frame at all. That's how it happened.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, where are each of you signing today? Should let people know. You're at Drawn, Miriam's at Drawn and Quarterly.
B34, B35.
I don't mean or the number. Bob, where are you going to be?
No, I want him to come.
I'm not signing today unless somebody just walks up to me. Tomorrow.
You're just cruising around.
Tomorrow I'll be doing something at the at the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, I think tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
And Stan?
NBM, the publisher, from 12:30 to 1:30, and then again around 3.
Oh, and
Okay.
I'm at 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock?
To, what was it, 12:30? Yes.
Okay.
1
All right.
o'clock. Drawn and Quarterly.
I'm like the wind, baby.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, guys.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, whoa, one more question.
Is minimum wage available for sales?
I'm sorry, I've never
That's-
read it, but I live very close to Bay Ridge.
Oh,
Oh.
well.
It's probably at the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund.
Actually, at the
Yeah.
Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, if you buy it there, then the money will even go to a good cause instead of me.
Oh. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank you.
inviting us. Thank you for coming.